All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first DuPage ROSC presentation series meeting of 2025. Glad to be here with y'all. My name is Jared. I am your DuPage ROSC coordinator. Those of you who are filing in, if you'd like, you can put your name and contact info and organization, if applicable, into the chat. It helps us to keep attendance, but it's also a nice way to be able to connect offline to make those connections. As those of you who are in the room said or heard me and Bruce say, there's a lot to get to. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into the presentation. I do need to give this man an intro, though. So Bruce was, I say the story all the time, Bruce is one of the first people in the field that I met when the ROS first started back in the summer of 2021. We had a table next to each other at a resource fair event. We started talking. We hit it off. I think Bruce was one of those champions of the ROS model early on and kind of understood the need for something like this. And he's just been such a great ally, but also a great friend over the past few years. Bruce presented on psychedelics a couple of years back. I think it was about 2 years ago. But a lot has happened since then. A lot of new people have come into the ROSC, and there's a lot of great information about psychedelics, not only folks who over the years have used them recreationally, but also the therapeutic uses. And as you will see, there's stuff happening in the legislation around psychedelics. Bruce is very involved in a lot of that stuff as well. So glad you could all be here for us and glad to have Bruce here. So Bruce, with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you and Bruce Sewick, everybody.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm going to share the screen there. Can everybody see that? Everybody,
Yep.
everybody good with that? Okay. So I want to start off by saying that what I'm talking about is not recreational use. I'm talking about the administration of an ingestion of medicine in a controlled setting with a facilitator there. So that's kind of the caveat. So I want to talk about what we learned since the psychedelic renaissance, which actually started in the early 90s. And I have to start off, for those of you that remember Timothy Leary, and I'm quoting Rick Doblin here, the executive director of MAPS. The Timothy Leary is dead, if you know the song by the Moody Blues. And the bad acid trip of the 70s is over. So I was around in those days. And so this is part two of the psychedelic renaissance. And I'm going to talk about what we learned and where we're heading. There's a lot of information here. And I sent Jarrett the PDF. We won't have time to get into the videos, so I'll just do the content. But the videos are a pretty good adjunct to the presentation. So what has initiated the psychedelic renaissance? Dr. Strassman attributes it to moderate doses, strict attention to non-drug factors, and a modest relationship with the media have contributed to the success that we are in the midst of right now. The mistake of the 60s was trying to build a culture outside of the mainstream, living in a tent by the river, ingesting psychedelic drugs, creating a subculture. That was a mistake. So Rick Doblin, who founded MAPS, and I have one of the co-founders on here and my mentor, Dr. Roberts, he said, we are not the counterculture, we are the culture. So what he kind of rolled out is we're not going to do it from the outside looking in, we're going to do it from the inside. So he said medicalization precedes legalization, and regulated research generates scientifically validated data about context and clinical applications in which benefits may outweigh risks. So, the whole idea is that science needs to drive this, and we'll talk about the politicalization of the war on drugs and the scheduling. So I think that this was kind of a key thing to work it from the inside out, not from the outside in. And you can see the results of it now. So the first thing that we've learned is that decriminalization, which is a non-criminal justice response to the possession of drugs, is gaining traction, and it makes sense. The thing to realize is that a country's drug enforcement policies appear to have little correlation with levels of drug use and misuse in that jurisdiction. So this decriminalization movement that you're seeing around the world demonstrates that decriminalization is viable and it's a successful policy option. It has not been the disaster that has been predicted. So that's the first thing that we need to know. It makes sense to approach it from this point of view. One of the things that kind of contributed to a lot of misinformation is the DARE program, this Dare to resist Drugs and Violence. This is an abysmal failure. There's no evidence to support the fact that the DARE program works. As a matter of fact, it has shown that it has increased people's interest in drugs in a way that maybe would have not have been the case if they weren't exposed to this. It doesn't work the way they portray it. And with this in mind, Louis' Law was passed July 1st, 2023, and this was because of the efforts of Louis' mom, who died of an overdose of 2012. She's a member of the ROSC and very influential, very active in the community. So this is kind of a different way of looking at educating students, kids in grammar school, to improve overdose and substance abuse education. And it's a different approach because the plan requires education on risk mitigation and harm reduction and responding to an overdose. So this is new. Teaching kids about harm reduction and how to mitigate risks and respond to an overdose is something that's new. And this is optional. So you have to ask for for this to go into effect in your school. So this is not something that's mandatory. Something to watch. This is a hot link of when this was announced. The motto here being just say no with the KNOW instead of Nancy Reagan's just say no. It should be that simple. So several cities and states have decriminalized one or more psychedelic substances. This is only a partial list. So Oregon and Colorado, Santa Cruz and Oakland, California, Washington, D.C., Somerville, Northampton, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, Seattle, Washington, and Ann Arbor, and Detroit, Michigan. And as I said, this is a partial list, and it's always changing. So I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the wide range of cities and places where decriminalization has occurred. So in Illinois, we have the Illinois Cure Act. These are the bill numbers. I know that it changed this year. I don't have that bill number for me before me, but the Cure Act stands for the Compassionate Use and Research of Entheogens. Entheogens being a term that was developed to kind of denote the respectful use of psychedelics as opposed to recreational use. So the Cure Act takes that into account. And it's looking to create a state-regulated psilocybin program, which allows licensed facilitators to provide psilocybin-assisted therapy to adults. And I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive in it. I looked at the bill and kind of came up with some bullet points so that you can kind of understand it. So first of all, it provides that the department, gets the applications for licensing of persons to manufacture or test it, and to operate service centers. So again, this is not something that you're going to go to Walgreens or CVS. This is going to take place in a facility that's licensed and regulated. As I said, it contains licensure requirements and prohibitions. It talks about how the manufacturing and delivering and possessing of psilocybin will be handled, and also how to dispose of the products to be in compliance with the Act and rules adopted under the Act. And it creates a control and regulation fund and to make sure that these changes conform to the State Finance Act. It also requires the Department of Agriculture, Financial and Professional Regulation, and the Department of Revenue to perform specific duties. Contains provision regarding rulemaking, taxes, fees, zoning, labeling, and penalties. Amends the Criminal Identification Act, changes the dates by which specified records for minor cannabis offenses shall be automatically expunged, And in that same vein, it provides for expungement of specified records concerning the possession of psilocybin and psilocin. So this amends the Illinois Controlled Substances Act in that it removes psilocybin from the list of Schedule I controlled substances, and it amends the Illinois Independent Tax Tribunal Act of 2012. So this Compassionate Use and Research of Entheogen Act amends the Freedom of Information Act to exempt specific records from disclosure, and it's effective immediately. So we are hoping that this bill will pass. I was able to testify at a committee hearing on December 10th, where we were trying to educate the public and also some of the legislators on just how tight this legislation is going to be. So this isn't going to be, this isn't going to be a throwback or a flashback to the 60s. So let's look at the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, which is kind of something that we kind of use as a kind of a way to look at a successful operation for psilocybin administration. So it basically, you start off with a preparation session. The client meets with a licensed facilitator for a preparation session. And then the client consumes the product again at the service center and begins the session with a licensed facilitator. And then there is an optional integration session, because one of the most important things when you are having when you are doing psilocybin in kind of a medicinal capacity is to be able to integrate what you've experienced and be able to take it into your everyday waking consciousness. So that is kind of an overall view of how that works in Oregon. So the next thing that we've learned from the psychedelic renaissance is that psychedelics occur in plants all over the world. And here is a kind of a world map view, and you can see from all the names how prolific psychedelic substances are occurring naturally in the world. So it's not something that is just a couple of species. This, it's all over the world in all various countries. And the indigenous people got it right. The ritual use of psychedelic plants as medicine is something that we are referring to now as a kind of a model. So this is something we did not have in the 60s and the 70s when this came out, is what did we have to refer to? How does society roll this out? And so we look back to the indigenous cultures, which for thousands of years in every corner of the globe have used psychedelics for spiritual and mental health. And what I pointed out in the at the hearing that I was at is we're talking about a plant that has been around for a long time. We're not talking about a street drug that you're buying from somebody on a street corner. So we're talking about a plant that has a lot of history. So the ritualistic context offers psychospiritual safeguards for healing, for knowledge, and again, structured use and restrictions on use. So that is the model that we've kind of built this, proposed act on. So we're talking about the indigenous use of magic mushrooms by the Mazatec Indians. We're talking about the Bwiti people of Gabon and the mystical iboga root. We're talking about the Huichol and their pilgrimage for peyote, and the Amazonian tribes in ayahuasca. So these are the indigenous use of sacred medicine, sacred plants that again have been used for a long time. Another thing that we've learned is that altered states are mind-body states. And this was something that Dr. Roberts kind of posited and has talked about, that the single state view of the mind is a fallacy. So the idea that there's only one state that counts is a fallacy. Our Western monophasic point of view of reality is defined by a waking state only, which does not acknowledge other states of consciousness as valid. So this is a mistake, and this is a kind of a fall down for a Western society to think that there's only one state of consciousness that is valid. Other societies that are polyphasic derive understanding from reality from multiple states of consciousness. So as Dr. Roberts said, it's more useful to consider multi-state theory instead. And kind of a key concept here and a way to understand it is that apps are to devices as mind-body states are to minds. So a way to conceptualize using psychedelics is as a mind application. And with that, you can combine other applications as, you can combine yoga and psychedelics, for instance, as an example. So that's a more useful way to look at a psychedelic state as a mind-body state, one of many states that you can experience. Stanislav Grof, whom I had the honor of meeting at the 2006 MAPS conference, states that by the way, Stanislav Grof is one of the most experienced researchers on non-ordinary states of consciousness. He refers to them as holotropic, which means moving toward wholeness. So if you look at the psychedelic experience as kind of moving toward a holistic integration during the experience. So it's moving toward a wholeness of consciousness. He posits that the human psyche is not limited to the postnatal biography and the Freudian individual consciousness, and he adds two additional layers of importance: the perinatal layer, which is before birth, and the transpersonal layer. And he also talks about memory aggregates that he's labeled condensed experiences that are, the acronym is COEX. And this is from The Way of the Psychonaut, which is a great book to read if you have the opportunity. So this is kind of a diagram of what he's talking about. You see that the ordinary ego consciousness that we are experiencing is kind of right at the level of ordinary ego consciousness here, biographical memories. And then one of the things that he came across when he was doing early psychedelic research is that people were able to regress to their birthing process. And he looked at that in great detail and came up with stages of birthing that may impact you going forward once you're born. And then beneath that is a transpersonal consciousness, mythical experiences, phylogenetic memories where species have memories that is kind of transposed down through the chain, ancestral memories and collective memories. So this is his system of condensed experience, the COX that I referred to, and levels of consciousness. These are the four perinatal matrices that Stanislav Grof was able to understand better using psychedelics. The first one being the amniotic universe before birth, and then the cosmic oppression as the fetus gets ready to go down the birth canal. And then there is a struggle that is very akin to a kind of a death rebirth before the final stage of birth. So this perinatal was something that some of his subjects, some of the participants were able to regress to and able to get resolution of. So this is a very kind of important concept that he was able to kind of understand and explain as a result of the thousands of psychedelic sessions that he facilitated. And then the transpersonal layer, things that transcend space and time that are not a part of the everyday consciousness. Another thing that we learned from the psychedelic renaissance is psychedelics do not cause mental illness. So the thing to remember and be aware of is that the reports about this are correlational rather than causational. They can trigger a psychotic experience, but that's very rare. So the fact that they don't cause mental illness, but it could happen at the same time when the mental illness manifests itself, is correlational. That's important to be aware of. Flashbacks, which is something that people refer to as a reason not to ingest psychedelics, are basically unprocessed psychological material. You can have a flashback without being on psychedelic drugs. You can remember, you can flash back to your childhood. You don't necessarily have to be on a psychedelic to have a flashback. So to give it a bad name by saying you're having a flashback is doing it a disservice. The extent to which a drug can alter the mind, this is important to know, is not linked in any way to the likelihood that the drug will cause physical damage. There's almost an inverse relationship between physical harm and psychoactive effect amongst the pleasure drugs. Let's talk about cigarettes. Cigarettes have only weak mental effects, but they are the most physically harmful. LSD, on the other hand, which produces a profoundly altered state of consciousness, has the least lasting effect on the body. And if you look at dreams as an altered state of consciousness, is something that is very important and profoundly essential to health. So this is an extreme state of altered consciousness that is very necessary to your mental health. As it turns out, the feeling that dreams are a lot like being on LSD may have some biological explanation. LSD works by activating serotonin receptors, including the serotonin 1A receptors, which in turn can block the release of serotonin in parts of the brain. All the weirdness of LSD, the hallucination, the insights may be a direct consequence of this biochemical blockade of serotonin release. So this could be something that is going on in the dream state here. So, that is kind of a natural way to understand what an altered state of consciousness under a psychedelic might be like. Psychedelics can be generators of ideas. Dr. Roberts likes to call them ideogens. Steve Jobs was one of the early people that came out of the psychedelic closet, and I want to read this quote because I think it's pretty powerful. He said, "I came of age at a magical time. Our consciousness was raised by Zen and also by LSD. Taking LSD was a profound experience, one of the most important things in my life. LSD shows you there's another side to the coin, and you can't remember it when it wears off, but you know it. It reinforced my sense of what is important, creating great things instead of making money, putting things back into the stream of history and human consciousness as much as I could." You can see how this was very threatening the first time around, especially with Timothy Leary's turn on, tune in, and drop out. This realization that money and material things are not the most important thing is potentially a side effect of the experience. And again, at that time, in that context, back in the 60s and 70s, it was kind of very threatening to the establishment. There was a creativity study with Dr. Oscar Janiger in 1954 that looked at LSD's effect on creativity, imagination, and spirituality. And what he found in this research was that the artists reported they had gained the ability to generate original insights, fresh perspectives, and novel creative ways to express themselves through their art. So we're going to look at before and after. So he used as a model for them to paint a Kachina doll. And this was a before and after picture. Obviously, you can tell which one is under the influence of a psychedelic. Harmon and his group administered 200 milligrams of mescaline to 26 talented people in Menlo Park in a problem-solving environment. So he invited this group of people to come with a problem and then allowed them to ingest 200 milligrams of mescaline, and found that if given according to this carefully structured regimen, psychedelic agents seem to facilitate creative problem solving, particularly in the illumination phase. So this suggests that various degrees of increased creative ability may continue for some weeks subsequent to a psychedelic problem-solving session. So the group of people, the engineers, physicists, and so forth, brought a problem, ingested the psychedelic mescaline, and then were able to problem solve. And then this continued, we like to call it the psychedelic afterglow, continued after the session. So it, as Dr. Roberts said, psychedelics can be a kind of an incubator for ideas. So some of the people that have admittedly used psychedelics to enhance creativity, Mark Pesce used LSD to influence the virtual reality modeling language. Carl Sagan used cannabis. Aldous Huxley talked about his psychedelic experiences used at death. Sam Peterson, the 1996 inventor of the year, admitted to cannabis use. Bob Wallace, one of the Microsoft founders, was a psychedelic philanthropist. Nobel Prize winning chemist Kary Mullis admits that LSD helped him develop PCR, a method used to amplify DNA. Ken Kesey, who many of you might remember, who is the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, wrote parts of that book under LSD. Dan Mercure uses psychedelics for literary creativity. Francis Crick, who is a Nobel Prize winning father of modern genetics, deduced the double helix structure of DNA under the influence of LSD. And Pittsburgh pitcher Doc Ellis hurled a no-hitter against San Diego Padres while under the influence of LSD. Just Google that. So he had ingested LSD and then was called on to pitch, and he hurled a no-hitter with a full-on psychedelic experience. Phil Jackson, who is also known as the Zen Master, said LSD inspired vision helped him see basketball in a new way that boosted his coaching performance. And then there's Burning Man. For those of you that are familiar with Burning Man, aside from being a way that people can experience art, it is a way to incorporate harm reduction as a safety factor to this festival that occurs at the end of summer. So it's a temporary community. An example of in 2022, 80,000 people attended. It takes place in the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. Psychedelic drugs are used there, although it's illegal. It spans up to 9 days, and it concludes the burning of Burning Man, which is how it got the name Burning Man, this wooden effigy. The important thing here is that a harm reduction approach by the Zendo Project provides a supportive environment and specialized care designed to be able to handle difficult experiences. The idea is that you don't talk somebody down from a proverbial bad trip. You talk them through it. So many social workers, psychiatrists, people in the field and looking to facilitate train at Burning Man in the Zendo Project, and it reduces the number of drug-related hospitalizations and arrests. Psychoactive drugs can facilitate mystical experiences and alter traits, is another thing we've learned. So the thing that distinguishes psychedelic agents from other classes of drugs is their capacity to reliably induce states of altered perception, thoughts and feelings that are not otherwise experienced except in dreams or at times, excuse me, of religious exaltation. So we can reliably induce an altered state of consciousness using psychedelics. Abraham Maslow, who you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, developed the concept of a peak experience. He talked about a transcendent, potentially spiritual, and life-changing experience such as a mystical experience. He felt that these experiences could play a role in self-actualization, and he was very influenced by early psychedelic research, which included using psychedelic facilitated peak experiences. He died suddenly from a heart attack in 1970, and he did not have a chance to fully research this. So that being said, this is what Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid would have looked like if he was able to continue his research. So on top of the self-actualization, where his pyramid is mostly cut off, would have been self-transcendence, something that is capable, can be facilitated, as I had said, by religious experiences and psychedelic experiences and life experiences. Daryl Linyaba, who wrote, I think, one of the best handbooks on drugs, called Uppers, Downers, and All-Rounders, talks about a psychoactive drug being any substance that when injected into a rat gives rise to a scientific paper. So we are talking about, and this is tongue in cheek, by the way, we are talking about a psychoactive drug. The definition is something that changes behavior by altering the normal functioning of the central nervous system. So mystical experiences, those that are generated endogenously, within yourself by natural means, and psychedelics can facilitate a quantum change with a possible shift in perception. So under the influence of a psychedelic in this altered state, you can facilitate a change in a person's perception and the way they look at life and a particular problem that they bring to the session. So this is very important to understand that under very defined conditions with very careful preparation, you can safely and fairly reliably occasion a primary mystical experience that may lead to positive changes in a person. I think that the title of the groundbreaking research in 2006 kind of says it all. Psilocybin can occasion mystical type experiences having substantial and sustained personal meaning and spiritual significance. In this study, more than 60% of subjects described the effects of psilocybin in ways that met criteria for full mystical experiences established by psychological scales. So again, the researchers did not know, who got the drug and who didn't. And when they filled out the questionnaires, they found out 60% of the people said that they felt and experienced a full mystical experience as a result of ingesting psilocybin. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act acknowledges two religious practices that include entheogenic, and again, this term which talks about and means generating the divine within. So they include two entheogenic plants in religious ceremonies. So under this Religious Freedom Restoration Act, depending on the state you live in, there's two substances that can be ingested in a religious ceremony legally. And that would be peyote, which you probably are aware of peyote ceremonies by the Native Americans in the United States, and ayahuasca, which is something that is used in South America and countries like Brazil. So under the auspices of a religious ceremony, ingestion of these drugs is legal. Now be aware these are not like something that are, these drugs, these plant medicines are not used recreationally because they have very powerful effects, including purging and insight, and very, very powerful and used very respectfully. So once again, this is the way we've been able to come up with a way to administer safely psychedelic plant medicine to people in a safe environment. Also, psychedelics may be used in sub-threshold doses. There's a lot of press about microdosing, which is the act of integrating sub-perceptual doses of psychedelics into your weekly routine for higher levels of creativity, more energy, increased focus, and improved relational skills. So that was another thing that came out of the research, is that you don't have to have a full-on psychedelic mystical experience. You can also use them in sub-threshold doses and reap benefits from it. Ayelet Wildman wrote a book, A Really Good Day. I want to read an excerpt from her book to give you an idea of how this felt to her. Today I took my first microdose. I feel a tiny bit more aware. The trees look prettier than usual. The jasmine smells more fragrant. It suddenly occurs to me that I feel mindful, feeling I have tried to achieve through meditation that I always come up with zip. I am finding it a little bit easier to notice both my thoughts and my body moving through space. So another key thing that we've learned, and we're still suffering the consequences of this, is that psychedelics should not be in the same DEA scheduling as addictive drugs. So the DEA was established by President Nixon as a hallmark of his war on drugs. And what I want to do, I want to read this to you so that you understand that the DEA scheduling that we're hanging our hat on was politically motivated. And this was made public at an interview with John Ehrlichman, Nixon's domestic affairs advisor and White House counsel, that talked about the true motivations. And I want to read this so that you can kind of digest this. So the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. So the takeaway from this is that the DEA scheduling was politically motivated. It is not based on safety and not based on any science. So when we look at DEA scheduling, what I'm talking about is in Schedule 1 for the most part, which has the highest potential for abuse with no medical uses, and that would include cannabis, that would include LSD, that would include psilocybin, and then working our way through the schedule. Schedule 2 is high potential for abuse. Schedule 3 is less risk for abuse than 1 and 2, but there's still risk. Ketamine is in this category, as is cocaine. Schedule 4, lower potential for abuse than Schedule 3, and Schedule 5, lowest potential for abuse of the scheduled drugs. So let's look at a way of looking at the safety of the drugs. So a way to kind of gauge the safety is to look at the fatal dose to the effective dose. So the dose at which you first start to feel effect and the dose at which it is fatal. You can see that the top 3 safest drugs from this criteria are marijuana, LSD, and psilocybin. The ratio there of a fatal dose, effective dose to fatal dose is 1,000 to 1. And then going down the diagram here, you see mescaline is 24, codeine is 20, MDMA is 16, cocaine is, when we talk about nasal, is 15. Alcohol, not even scheduled, 10 to 1 ratio of fatal dose to effective dose. Nutmeg, which is not scheduled, and heroin, the ratio is 5 times the effective dose to the fatal dose. So you can see from this that the scheduling has nothing to do with safety. It's all about politics. Dr. David Nutt came up with another way to gauge the harm caused by drugs by combining the harm that it does to the person ingesting it and the harm to others. So again, the top drug is alcohol, followed by heroin, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, cocaine, tobacco, and you can see in the middle of the chart is cannabis, and working way down is ecstasy, LSD, and mushrooms at the very bottom. So again, this is a combined way of looking at the harm to others. And when we're talking about harm to others, we're also talking about as a result of the drug laws and also to harm to users. So again, alcohol and heroin top that list as being very harmful. Psychedelics can act as psychointegrators, which is part of the therapeutic value of the using of psychedelics in therapy. It activates the serotonergic circuitry between the lower structures of the brain, resulting in enhancement of consciousness, producing spiritual and transcendent experiences. This works by disinhibiting emotional and social processes and stimulates the systematic integration of brain functions, particularly the limbic system and the emotional processes with neocortical processes. So what it does is it links the thinking part of the brain with the emotional part of the brain in a way that can be processed, which is very valuable when you think about that in a session. Also, serotonergic psychedelics are psychoplastogens. This has come out recently. To be classified as a psychoplastogen, the compound has to produce a measurable change in plasticity, such as a change in neurite growth, dendrite, spine density, synapse numbers within a short period of time, typically 24 to 72 hours following a single administration. So serotonergic psychedelics can facilitate this change that actually makes you more psychologically adjusted. Here is a before and after picture of ketamine being administered to a a cultured cortical neuron. So this is a before and after picture. You can see the increase in synapses and dendritic growth. So when we used to think that the brain was not plastic, and we found out that it is, and the serotonergic hallucinogens facilitate this psychoplangenity. I don't think there is such a word, but facilitates this, which can help you psychologically and is one of the possible explanations of why it is so effective in things like chronic depression. Here is a diagram to show with psilocybin how it promotes neuroplasticity. So again, a before and after picture. You can see that on the right there, psilocybin has all the various parts of the brain talking to each other, the synaptic connections, which facilitates learning and change in behavior, this insight. So this is something that is very indigenous to psychedelics when used in a therapeutic context. And then let's talk about cannabis. It's more than just getting high, or as Barry McCaffrey said, Cheech and Chong medicine. Cannabis has a very revered history of medical use as a muscle relaxant, a painkiller, an appetite stimulant, and an anxiolytic. It was used to stimulate childbirth, control spasms and convulsions, relieve coughs, and treat symptoms of withdrawal from alcohol and opiates. This is a chart that shows the pharmacological actions of the non-psychotropic cannabinoids. So you can see some of the impacts of the non-psychotropic cannabinoids, everything from antipsychotic, antispasmodic, analgesic, bone stimulant. So there's a lot of potential for the non-psychoactive things that are part of the cannabis plant to be used medicinally. And because we have not been able to do much research, we're kind of at a loss for how to use it. But it's starting to change now, but not with a lot of work on the funding bodies. In 1990, researchers found receptor sites in the brain that reacted to THC. So the brain has its own natural neurotransmitters, which we call endocannabinoids, that fit into the cannabinoid receptor sites. The thing to think about, and Julie Holland talks about this, and this is very powerful, within a cannabis plant's ancestral lineage, compounds evolved that are remarkable biochemical mimics of our own endocannabinoids. So again, something that means we should respect these plants that have been around and have been used for centuries as being potential for medicinal and reflective and therapeutic use. So when we talk about medical marijuana and its history, marijuana has been used for entheogenic experiences in various cultures, estimated since 2700 BC. In 2021, MAPS was awarded a grant to expand cannabis research for veterans with PTSD, but the FDA placed a hold on it. Fortunately, what happened is MAPS successfully cleared a path by disputing this, and they were cleared in November after 3 years of negotiation. So they are now going to be able to examine the use of smoked cannabis, the idea being that this mirrors real-world consumption in treatment of PTSD amongst 320 vets. And then with this, they'll be able to benefit future clinical researches of medical cannabis treatment. Also, serotonergic psychedelics help with the symptoms of cluster headaches. So you can find relief from cluster headaches, which are known as suicide headaches, through the use of serotonergic hallucinogens. Currently, Yale University is collaborating with the Hefter Research Institute in researching the use of psilocybin to treat cluster headaches. Also, suicidal thoughts are rapidly reduced with ketamine, and this is the injection of ketamine, the ketamine infusion. Remember, ketamine is a Schedule 3. Johnson & Johnson came out with a nasal version of a nasal version of ketamine called S-ketamine by tweaking the molecules. But bear in mind that the infusion of ketamine reduces suicidality in hours. So the potential to reduce suicide ideation is out there. And I just read an article that Medicaid is going to cover ketamine. Psychedelics have been used successfully as a therapeutic adjunct to therapy. I'm going to talk about the three main funding body, the Hefter Research Institute, which is kind of focused on psilocybin research. In some of the research, they looked at cancer-related emotional distress and relief of depression. Way to look at the way psilocybin can reduce depression is the loss of ego-centered consciousness. Michael Pollan, in his book, How to Change Your Mind, says, when the ego sleeps, the mind plays, proposing unexpected patterns of thought and new ways of relation. So it's kind of like shaking the snow globe. So you kind of have an entrenched way of looking at things, and then you ingest a psychedelic in a controlled setting with a trained facilitator, and the snow globe is shaken, and it can settle a little differently with aftercare and integration. Pam Sakuda was diagnosed with metastatic colon cancer and given 6 months to live. If you get a chance, watch this YouTube video. She talked about about how it improved the last months of her life after being part of some of this groundbreaking psilocybin research for people dying of cancer. Because some of the early psychedelic research that was approved were for people that were terminally ill. The Beckley Foundation out of the UK has focused on psilocybin to alleviate treatment-resistant depression. They also showed that it can be used as an adjunct for smoking cessation. Psilocybin may treat depression by engaging and accepting and confronting difficult emotions rather than avoiding or disconnecting. The facilitators tell the participants that when you are experiencing a difficult emotion, to run toward it and to go through it and not to fight it, to experience it. But it tells you if the experience makes you feel you should die, then you die metaphorically. And the way to get through it is by going through it, not by fighting it. MAPS, which I've talked about and quoted Rick Doblin, one of the premier funding bodies here, had been looking at LSD to treat life-threatening illnesses. They had a research that was completed in Switzerland. LSD has kind of a bad connotation because of the turn on, tune in, drop out mantra that Timothy Leary talked about. So research indicated that LSD has a therapeutic potential, which we knew that, in helping people kind of accept their fate and fate at end of life, the anxiety that comes with it. LSD, by the way, LSD medicine was given breakthrough therapy designated by the FDA for generalized anxiety disorder. This was how it started for MDMA and psilocybin. So LSD was given breakthrough therapy in March of 2024. This is Alex Gray's rendition of Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD, although he claims LSD discovered him. It's celebrated on April 19th, Bicycle Day, which Dr. Roberts takes credit for. Thank you for that. Ibogaine, which has been used to treat heroin addiction, is something that grows in equatorial Africa. MAPS completed an observational study that shows that it has great potential for opioid addiction, and it's a Schedule 1, so we don't have any research here. But one of the things that we learned from the 60s and 70s is we can do observational studies and then petition the IRB for application to have actual research. So what was found with this observational studies is that it had a substantive treatment effect in opioid detoxification. So one of the amazing things about Ibogaine is that it attenuates the withdrawal symptoms. So it reduces the withdrawal symptoms, and then you have the psychedelic experience, which is oftentimes biographical and can pinpoint where the individual kind of went off the track. So they showed that that this effect was sustained up to 12 months in the subgroups of subjects. So this has great potentials. And again, it's a Schedule 1. It takes a lot of money to move it through all the stages to finally get it to be able to be used publicly. So the pharmaceutical companies have the money. That's why they focused only on a handful of psychedelics, because it is so very costly. And ayahuasca, which is another naturally occurring plant, there was a research done sponsored by MAPS Canada showing the safety and long-term effectiveness of ayahuasca for individuals suffering from addiction and dependence. And by the way, the LSD has a kind of a history of being used successfully treating alcoholics. Bill Wilson actually had tried LSD and was going to bring that as part of the treatment, but the very organization he founded turned it down. So it's just something to be aware of. He mentions it in his book. So the ayahuasca-assisted therapy for stress and addiction correlated statistically with improvements in mindfulness, empowerment, hopefulness, and quality of life outlook and life meaning, and statistically significant reduction in cocaine use. So these findings show that there's potential for treatment for addictions, and the effects of ceremonial ayahuasca drinking, which is common in Brazil and so forth, has shown that people that are part of the religion there are more psychologically adjusted when tests were done than the population that did not ingest ayahuasca. So again, a lot of potential there. I'm very excited to say that the VA is funding a study on psychedelic therapy the first time in more than half a century. The U.S. Department of VA, the Veterans Affairs, announced it'll fund a study on MDMA-assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder and alcohol use among veterans. This will take place in the VA Medical Center in Rhode Island and the West Haven VA Medical Center in Connecticut, and it's supposed to start later this year. So I'm very excited to say that. This is a video that you should watch, CBS Sunday morning on MDMA and the vets. So let's look at MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. It was designated breakthrough by FDA in 2017. The FDA approved expanded access in 2020. So people that met criteria could have access to this outside of research. Despite 80 members of Congress advocacy, FDA rejected Lykos new drug application to permit MDMA-assisted therapy to treat PTSD. What's the takeaway here? FDA is not used to approving therapy and meds, and Lykos is going to continue the fight by making it more to their liking. We also may need to have an active placebo to mitigate expectancy effects. So when you are having research, at some point, everybody knows who has the drug and who doesn't. A way to mitigate that is to give somebody an active placebo like niacin or a subthreshold dose, so that there is kind of a physiological response, so you don't really know if you did get the actual psychedelic. And then, unfortunately, there were instances of unethical conduct during research which came out. I want to kind of conclude with a couple of quotes here. This one from Terence McKenna, who was kind of the bard of psychedelia some time ago. You can wander around the sanctioned playpen of ordinary consciousness. We've got some intoxicants over here. If you want to mess yourself up, we've got scotch, some tobacco, some red meat, sugar, and a little TV. But these boundary-dissolving hallucinogens that connect you with your fellow man and nature are somehow forbidden. This is an outrage. It is a sign of cultural immaturity. And the fact that we tolerate it is a sign that we are living in a society as oppressed as any society in the past. So I'll conclude with this quote. Our technique may change the practice of psychotherapy on a scale akin to what has followed in medicine after the discovery of antibiotics. So that kind of concludes that. I covered a lot of material here. I got a little bit of time left here. Any questions?
Yeah, if anybody has a question, why don't you raise your digital hand so we can maybe get an order of asking questions or comments for Bruce. Bruce, thank you again. Great presentation. I just want to say I'm glad you bring up in this presentation the kind of myth of psychedelics being this, cause of mental illness. Like you hear those stories of somebody took acid once and they fried their brain forever. I think that's one of those like really harmful stereotypes that come up around it. So I'm always glad to hear you touch on that during this presentation. Yeah, I don't know if you had any other comments on that.
Well, I remember when I was the first time around, there was one of the things that got a lot of attention. They said, and it hit the newspapers that there were some people that they were on LSD and had a conversation with the sun and burned their retinas, and so that made the headlines. It turns out it was debunked. It was nonsense. And the problem is, and that was what I alluded to earlier, when the news media jumped on it, it initially started out as being the darling of psychotherapy, and then it turned into this all these myths and things that were exaggerated, and then it caused a problem. And of course, Richard Nixon, the war on drugs, the way to target minorities, made it unfortunately something we're living with to this day. We have more people incarcerated than any other people in the world, and a lot of it is due to the war on drugs, which is very unfortunate when you think of the fact that it was based on politics, not science.
Yeah, any other questions or comments for Bruce? You can either come off mute or raise your hand.
Oh, I thought I raised my hand. I can't find it. But my question is this. I know they recently legalized marijuana, but is they got those gummies now. I mean, and I've had friends that take a gummy or half a gummy and they're out for 2 days. And I was just wondering if you knew of any research uh, about that.
Well, the legal gummies that you get in dispensaries are different from the gummies that you get in gas stations
Hmm.
and vape shops. So, it is psychoactive. And so, the mantra is go low and slow, right? So
Yeah.
go with low dose and go slow, just like anything else. And so, it's educating people that makes it is key here. So, you don't take a couple of gummies. It's just like anything else. You don't drink, a pint of alcohol the first time you try something like that. So it's low and slow.
Yeah. Okay.
Bruce, do you want to say something about your classes at COD?
Oh, yes, thank you. So this, by the way, is Dr. Tom Roberts, my psychedelic academic mentor, who actually got me on the road to academic psychedelics. So I teach a class at College of DuPage. It'll be this summer. And so stay tuned for that. Jarrett knows how to get a hold of me once they have the dates. It's a 2-hour credit class and one of many classes now that are offered across the country. So thanks for that reminder, Dr. Roberts. Any other questions?
Yeah,
I
looks
would,
like, oh, we got a few here. Let's see. Cameron, I think your hand was up first, if you want to go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we got you.
I was wondering, I guess something that was brought up was the like complication of like double blind studies and stuff like that. And it does make me curious about like what are some of the strategies that have been implemented like in a more like modern sense to kind of facilitate those studies? Because I know that's kind of been a linchpin in a lot of like actual studies that can be presented, especially like at that public hearing. I think, there are a lot of people there that like are quick to ask for proof about their effectiveness and stuff, but there hasn't really been the research available to meet their like stringent criteria. So I was curious about where that's gone and how that's developed
I
during
think,
this renaissance.
yeah, and you were there at that hearing, and I think the thing that we've learned from it, and I had alluded to it, is that you have to give somebody an active placebo, something where you're starting the person that has not got the therapeutic dose is starting to feel something because that the double bind, this gold standard does not really work very well with psychedelics. And I think we learned that from the FDA turning down MDMA, and Lycos, I understand, is going to modify it a little bit, and they're going to take another pass at the FDA. So I know in the past, and maybe Dr. Roberts knows some more specifics here, they've used niacin and subthreshold doses, which give you the feeling that something is about to happen, but you don't have a full-on experience. Dr. Roberts, do you have anything on that? Any other information?
No, I don't, other than the substandard dose seems to be the best way of approaching it. Also, the idea that people expect to have a beneficial result and the doctors expect to have a beneficial, of course. You go to a doctor with the expectation that whatever you're going to take is going to work. And that if the doctor is providing something without any expectations of work, that's outright fraud. So of course you will expect to have a good outline, and the researchers expect to. That's part of the medical procedure.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. So the idea that people are influencing it by kind of teaching them what the results are is part of the, I don't want to say the magic because that's the wrong word. It's part of the value of psychedelics, and that so it is a completely different paradigm than some of the research. Another thing I'm tired of kind of defending, and Cameron can attest to that at the hearing, was one of the points people were making against psychedelics is that Matthew Perry died of ketamine. I don't know what that has to do with what we're talking about, but that is, I often hear that from people. The fact that, my understanding of it is that he had access to it and was using it outside of a prescribed setting. And so that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I see there's other hands.
Yeah, we got Michelle. Why don't we take her as the last question and then we'll wrap up. Michelle, go right ahead.
Mine are quick, I promise. Two parts though. One, will this presentation be available because the links were not clickable?
Right.
And when you offer your class, will it be offered virtually or only in person?
It'll be offered online.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So that means you
And
charge the in-district fee.
and Bruce, if you just resend the presentation to me, Michelle, I'll forward it to you.
Great, thank you.
And
I'd like to
it'll be a PDF, so you'll have to type in the links because it's too big.
Oh, I get that. That's okay. I think I can copy and paste those so
Yeah.
that'll work out. Thank you.
I know we covered a lot of material, so there'll be a lot of questions and
Well, listen, Bruce. Yeah, of course. I'm happy to share that stuff. Bruce, thank you again for the presentation. You've been such a great friend of the program. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you, everybody.